Shadows over a legacy, the controversial aspects of FDR's presidency. Franklin D. Roosevelt, the 32nd President of the United States, remains a pivotal figure in American history for his leadership during the Great Depression and World War II. However, his presidency was not without its deeply controversial and negative aspects. Here, we explore 10 of the most distressing facts about his time in office and personal decisions, shedding light on the complexities of his legacy. Fact number 1. Japanese internment camps. On February 19, 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, which authorized the Secretary of War and military commanders to designate military areas from which any or all persons may be excluded. This order laid the groundwork for the internment of Japanese Americans, affecting over 120,000 individuals, two-thirds of whom were U.S. citizens. The justification for this drastic action was national security concerns following the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. The internment process uprooted families and individuals from their homes, stripping them of their properties and placing them in camps situated in remote areas across the United States. These internment camps were characterized by their harsh living conditions, with inadequate housing, insufficient food, and a lack of proper medical facilities. The internees faced significant losses, both material and psychological, as they were forced to leave behind their lives and belongings with little hope of return. It wasn't until 1988 that the U.S. government formally apologized through the Civil Liberties Act, acknowledging the grave injustice and offering reparations to surviving Japanese Americans who had been interned. Number 2. Refusal to support anti-lynching legislation. Despite recognizing the barbarity of lynching, President Roosevelt refrained from endorsing the anti-lynching legislation that was proposed during his presidency. His refusal is often attributed to political pragmatism. Roosevelt feared alienating Southern Democrats, whose support was crucial for passing other components of his New Deal agenda. Lynching, a brutal form of vigilante justice aimed predominantly at African Americans, continued unchecked due to this lack of federal intervention. In the early 1930s, New York Senator Robert F. Wagner and Indiana Senator Frederick Van Nuys introduced an anti-lynching bill, which aimed to make lynching a federal crime. Despite public support and the pressing need for such legislation, Roosevelt did not lend his backing. His decision highlights the political compromises made at the expense of civil rights and justice for African Americans, perpetuating a legacy of racial violence and inequality. Number 3. Failure to aid Jewish refugees. As the horrors of the Holocaust unfolded, the United States, under President Roosevelt's administration, maintained stringent immigration quotas that severely limited the number of Jewish refugees who could seek asylum in the country. A poignant example of this failure to aid those fleeing persecution is the case of the Mississippi St. Louis. In 1939, this German ocean liner carried 937 passengers, most of whom were Jewish refugees seeking refuge in the United States from the growing threat of Nazi Germany. Due to the restrictive immigration policies and political reluctance to ease them, the Mississippi St. Louis was denied permission to dock in the United States, forcing the ship to return to Europe. Tragically, over 250 of its passengers subsequently died in the Holocaust. The refusal to provide sanctuary to these refugees stands as a stark example of the consequences of restrictive immigration policies and the broader failure of the international community to respond adequately to the plight of Jews during World War II. Number 4. Failure to bomb Holocaust rail lines. The Roosevelt administration's decision against bombing the rail lines to Auschwitz and other Nazi camps during World War II has been a focal point of historical debate. This choice was informed by several factors, including military strategy considerations and the logistical capabilities of the time. Despite receiving detailed intelligence reports about the Holocaust and facing calls for action from Jewish leaders, U.S. officials argued that such missions wouldn't be practical. They maintained that precision bombing of rail lines wasn't feasible with the technology and resources available, and emphasized the need to prioritize direct military targets crucial to defeating the Axis powers. Critics of the decision argue that bombing the railways could have disrupted the systematic transportation of victims to the death camps, potentially saving thousands of lives. However, defenders point out the strategic rationale behind focusing Allied efforts on industrial and military targets to hasten the end of the war. Number 5. The Court-Packing Plan. In 1937, Roosevelt proposed a significant reform to the U.S. Supreme Court, widely known as the Court-Packing Plan. This proposal emerged from Roosevelt's frustration with the court, which had ruled against several New Deal measures, viewing them as unconstitutional. His plan, formerly known as the Judicial Procedures Reform Bill of 1937, sought to allow the president to appoint an additional Supreme Court justice for every sitting justice over the age of 70.5, up to a maximum of 6 additional justices. Roosevelt argued that this was necessary to alleviate the workload of older justices and ensure efficient judicial operations. However, critics accused him of attempting to undermine the judicial branch's independence by filling it with justices who would be favorable to his policies. The proposal sparked a massive public backlash and was ultimately defeated in Congress, dealing a significant blow to Roosevelt's political capital and marking one of the most controversial moments of his presidency. Number 6. Ignoring civil rights for African Americans. Roosevelt's relationship with civil rights for African Americans was complex and often contradictory. While he implemented policies that improved the economic conditions of many Americans, including African Americans, through the New Deal, he also made significant compromises that sidelined civil rights issues. His reluctance to support anti-lynching legislation and the lack of action toward desegregating the armed forces are often cited as examples of these compromises. Roosevelt faced pressure from Southern Democrats, who were essential for passing New Deal legislation but staunchly opposed civil rights measures that would challenge the racial status quo in the South. As a result, Roosevelt often avoided taking firm stands on civil rights issues to maintain political support, reflecting the political constraints and racial attitudes of the time. This pragmatic approach allowed systemic racial injustices to persist, highlighting the limitations of Roosevelt's progressivism concerning racial equality. Number 7. FDR's controversial stance on homosexuality, the Newport Scandal. In 1919, under Franklin D. Roosevelt's direction as Assistant Secretary of the Navy, an operation in Newport, Rhode Island, targeted homosexual men in the Navy. This initiative involved young servicemen acting as decoys to entrap others in homosexual acts, reflecting societal norms that vilified homosexuality as a morbid sexual passion. The operation, criticized for its moral implications and legal overreach, led to a Senate investigation that denounced Roosevelt's tactics as a violation of American values and rights. This episode, part of Roosevelt's complex legacy, highlights the early 20th century challenges faced by the LGBTQ+ community and the institutional discrimination within the military. The Newport scandal, while not widely publicized at the time, has since become a notable instance of historical discrimination against homosexuals, illustrating the evolving battle for LGBTQ+ rights and recognition in American history. Number 8. Accusations of socialist and fascist sympathies. Franklin D. Roosevelt's presidency was marked by significant expansion of federal programs through the New Deal, aimed at combating the Great Depression. These actions led conservatives to label him a socialist, accusing him of overreaching government intervention in the economy. Conversely, leftist critics, including the Communist Party USA, charged him with fascist tendencies, particularly citing the militaristic structure of the Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC. This program, designed to provide jobs through environmental conservation projects, was organized along military lines, which critics argued mirrored fascist organizational methods. These opposing accusations reflect the highly polarized view of Roosevelt's policies and underscore the contentious political atmosphere of the 1930s and 1940s. Number 9. Extramarital affairs. Franklin D. Roosevelt's marriage to Eleanor Roosevelt was both a partnership and a source of personal scandal. Roosevelt's affair with Lucy Mercer, which began around 1916, was perhaps the most significant. Eleanor discovered the affair in 1918, causing a profound strain in their marriage. Despite this, the Roosevelts remained married, transforming their relationship into more of a political alliance than a traditional marriage. FDR's relationship with Mercer continued discreetly for years and was a well-kept secret from the public. Mercer was even present at Roosevelt's side when he died in 1945, a fact that underscores the depth and longevity of their relationship. Roosevelt's ability to maintain this affair, along with rumored relationships with other women, illustrates the complex nature of his private life, which stood in stark contrast to his public persona as a devoted husband and leader. Number 10. Manipulation of media and public image. Roosevelt was pioneering in his use of the media to shape his public image and communicate directly with the American people. His mastery of radio broadcasts, known as the fireside chats, allowed him to bypass traditional press outlets and speak directly to citizens, fostering a sense of personal connection and trust. These chats were instrumental in bolstering public morale during the Great Depression and World War II. However, Roosevelt's administration also took steps to control and suppress news that might harm wartime morale or divulge sensitive information. The Office of Censorship, established during World War II, monitored and censored communications deemed a threat to national security. While this was justified as necessary for the war effort, it raised concerns about freedom of the press and the extent of government control over information.